I set the table for 6 people on Mother's Day. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I was the only one sitting there. My name is Patricia Monroe. I am 68 years old, and until that day, I still believed that family traditions meant something. The dining room looked exactly the way it always had on special occasions. Fresh flowers sat in the center of the table. The good china was arranged carefully at each place setting. A roast rested in the oven, filling the house with familiar aromas that reminded me of happier years. Outside, the spring sunshine filtered through the curtains, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floor. Everything looked beautiful. Everything except the empty chairs. Mother's Day had always been important in our family. Even after my husband Daniel passed away 2 years earlier, I continued hosting small gatherings whenever I could. It gave me something to look forward to. It gave me a reason to keep traditions alive. Most of all, it helped me feel connected to the people I loved. That morning, I woke before sunrise. I baked my son's favorite pie. I arranged flowers. I ironed a tablecloth that had been in our family for nearly 20 years. Around 9 o'clock, I received a short text message from my son Jason. "See you this afternoon, Mom." Just 6 words. Yet those 6 words carried enough hope to brighten my entire morning. By noon, everything was ready. I changed into a light blue dress Daniel always liked and checked the driveway every few minutes. 1 o'clock came and went. Then 2 o'clock. The coffee slowly cooled in the pot. The pie remained untouched. The flowers sat perfectly still in the center of the table. I checked my phone. Nothing. At 2:30, I called Jason. Straight to voicemail. I told myself not to worry. Traffic happens. Plans get delayed. Families run late. At 3 o'clock, I called again. Another voicemail. This time, I left a message asking if everything was all right. Then I waited. The house felt strangely quiet. Every sound seemed louder than usual. The ticking clock in the hallway. The hum of the refrigerator. The distant barking of a neighbor's dog. I sat at the dining room table staring at the empty chairs and tried not to think about how many Mother's Days I had spent making sure everyone else felt loved. By 4 o'clock, the truth became impossible to ignore. Nobody was coming. No explanation. No apology. No phone call. Just silence. I stood up slowly and began clearing the table. One plate at a time. One glass at a time. The same hands that had prepared everything now packed it away. As I wrapped leftovers and carried dishes into the kitchen, memories drifted through my mind. Jason as a little boy bringing me handmade cards. Family brunches filled with laughter. Daniel teasing everyone around the table. Those moments felt very far away. I had just placed the final serving dish into the sink when my phone rang. The sound startled me. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen. The number was unfamiliar. Not Jason. Not Rachel. Not anyone I recognized. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then something told me to answer. Looking back now, I can honestly say that single phone call changed the direction of my life in ways I could never have imagined. My hand hovered over the screen for a second before I answered. "Hello." I expected a wrong number. Maybe a telemarketer. Instead, I heard the voice of a young woman. She sounded nervous. "Mrs. Monroe?" she asked. "Yes." There was a brief pause. Then she said something that immediately caught my attention. "I hope I am not bothering you, but I think you should know your son never received the invitation." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. For a moment, I was not even sure I understood what she meant. The young woman introduced herself as Hannah. She worked part-time at a local event planning company. At first, none of it made sense. Then she explained that her company had recently helped organize a community fundraiser where Rachel had volunteered. During a conversation earlier that week, Rachel mentioned that Jason and Sophie would be spending Mother's Day at an all-day event across town. Hannah only remembered because she had overheard Rachel joking that nobody would be interrupting their schedule. My confusion deepened. Jason had texted me that morning saying he would see me in the afternoon. Hannah continued carefully. Apparently, she had also heard Rachel mention that she handled most family scheduling because Jason rarely checked details himself. The information sounded harmless on the surface, yet something about it unsettled me. I thanked Hannah for calling and asked why she felt the need to tell me any of this. Her answer surprised me. "Because I lost my mother 3 years ago," she said quietly. "And when I realized you might be sitting alone today, I could not stop thinking about it." After we hung up, I remained motionless for several minutes. The house was silent again. The flowers still sat untouched in the dining room. The pie remained exactly where I left it. Yet now a different feeling had entered the room. Not sadness. Questions. I picked up my phone and looked at Jason's text message once more. See you this afternoon, Mom. The words suddenly felt different. If he truly planned to come, what happened? Had he forgotten? Had something changed? Or had someone else decided his schedule for him? By evening, Jason still had not called. Neither had Rachel. Neither had Sophie. I eventually packed the remaining leftovers into containers and placed them in the refrigerator. Then I sat alone in the living room, watching the sun disappear behind the trees outside. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Sleep had been difficult. Hannah's phone call kept replaying in my mind. So did several memories from the previous year. Invitations that arrived late. Plans that changed at the last minute. Family gatherings I learned about afterward. At the time, I accepted every explanation without question. Life gets busy. Families become complicated. These things happen. But now, for the first time, I wondered whether I had ignored a pattern hiding in plain sight. Around 10 o'clock, my phone finally rang. Jason's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a moment before answering. His voice sounded rushed. Apologetic. He immediately began explaining that he thought Mother's Day dinner was scheduled for the following weekend. He sounded genuinely confused. As I listened, one realization settled heavily in my chest. Jason and I were not remembering the same conversation. And somehow, somewhere between us, the truth had been changed. After I ended the call with Jason, I sat quietly at the kitchen table staring at my phone. His confusion had sounded real. That was what troubled me most. If he had forgotten, I could understand it. If he had chosen not to come, at least I would know where I stood. But confusion suggested something else entirely. Over the next several days, I found myself replaying old conversations in my mind. At first, the memories seemed unrelated. Then patterns began emerging. There was the Thanksgiving dinner I supposedly declined because I already had plans. I remembered being surprised when I saw photographs online and realized everyone had gathered without me. At the time, Rachel explained there must have been a misunderstanding. Then there was Sophie's school award ceremony. I only learned about it afterward. Again, I was told the invitation must have gotten lost somewhere. Christmas brunch the previous year. A weekend trip to a nearby lake. A birthday dinner for Jason's friend. One by one, memories resurfaced. Each incident had its own explanation. Each explanation sounded reasonable on its own. Together, however, they formed a picture I could no longer ignore. The following Friday, I decided to stop guessing. I drove to a small cafe where Jason and I used to meet occasionally before Daniel passed away. I sent him a message asking if he could stop by after work. To my surprise, he agreed immediately. When he arrived, he looked tired, older than I remembered. We ordered coffee and spent a few minutes discussing ordinary things before the conversation turned toward Mother's Day. Jason apologized again. He insisted he believed the family gathering was scheduled for the following weekend. Then he pulled out his phone. What he showed me made my stomach tighten. There, in a family calendar application Rachel managed, Mother's Day lunch at my house appeared on a completely different date. Jason looked genuinely puzzled. He scrolled through additional entries. Several family events from the previous year carried notes and updates neither of us recognized. That is strange, he said quietly. Strange. The word felt far too small. Neither of us accused anyone of anything. We simply sat there looking at information that did not match our memories. Before leaving, Jason promised to look into it. I nodded and told him not to worry. The truth was, something inside me had already changed. For months, maybe longer, I had assumed every disappointment was my responsibility to understand and forgive. I blamed timing, circumstances, busy schedules. Now I realized I had been working very hard to explain things that never made sense to begin with. That weekend, I stayed home and worked in my garden. The roses Daniel planted years earlier were beginning to bloom. As I trimmed branches and pulled weeds, I noticed how peaceful the afternoon felt. For once, I was not waiting for a phone call, not waiting for an invitation, not checking my messages every few minutes. The silence no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space to ask a question I should have asked long ago. If people truly wanted me in their lives, why had I spent so much time fighting to stay there? The question followed me everywhere after that afternoon in the garden. If people truly wanted me in their lives, why had I spent so much energy making it easy for them to forget me? A few days later, I found myself standing in the attic surrounded by boxes I had not opened since Daniel passed away. Dust floated through beams of sunlight coming from a small window near the roof. Most of the boxes contained ordinary things. Holiday decorations, old tax records, board games Sophie used to play when she spent weekends at my house. Then I found a collection of photo albums. I carried them downstairs and spread them across the dining room table. For the rest of the afternoon, I turned page after page, revisiting decades of memories. There was Jason's first baseball uniform, Sophie's kindergarten graduation, family camping trips, birthday parties, school recitals, summer cookouts. Looking through those photographs, I noticed something that had never occurred to me before. In many of them, I was either holding the camera or standing somewhere just outside the frame. I had spent years preserving memories while quietly disappearing from them at the same time. The realization made me smile sadly. That evening, I found an old notebook Daniel used during retirement. Most entries were simple observations about weather, gardening, and family visits. Daniel was never a dramatic writer. He preferred short thoughts and practical notes. Yet one entry stopped me completely. It had been written about a year before he passed away. Patricia keeps this family together more than anyone realizes. I hope they never take that for granted. I read the sentence several times. Then I closed the notebook and sat quietly at the table. Tears filled my eyes, not because I felt sorry for myself, but because Daniel had seen something I was only beginning to understand. For decades, I had measured my worth by what I could do for other people. If someone needed help, I helped. If someone needed support, I showed up. If someone needed a holiday dinner, a ride to an appointment, or someone to watch a child for the afternoon, I was there. I never questioned it. Family mattered. But somewhere along the way, being needed became the only way I knew how to feel valued. The following weekend, I declined an invitation for the first time in years. A neighbor had invited me to join a local gardening club meeting. Normally, I would have said no because I wanted to keep my schedule open in case Jason or Sophie called. Instead, I accepted immediately. The meeting took place at a community center about 15 minutes from my house. I expected to feel out of place. Instead, I spent 2 hours talking with people who shared stories about flowers, vegetables, travel, books, and future plans. Nobody asked me to solve their problems. Nobody needed anything from me. They simply enjoyed my company. Driving home that evening, I realized how long it had been since I had experienced that feeling. As I pulled into my driveway, the porch light automatically switched on. The house looked warm and welcoming. For the first time since Mother's Day, I did not feel abandoned. I felt curious about what my life might become if I stopped waiting for everyone else to decide whether I mattered. The gardening club meeting turned out to be the beginning of something I never expected. Over the next several weeks, I attended regularly. At first, I went because it filled an empty afternoon. Then I kept going because I genuinely enjoyed it. The people there talked about projects, travel plans, books, and hobbies. Their conversations were filled with possibilities rather than obligations. One afternoon after a meeting, I joined a small group for coffee at a nearby cafe. We spent nearly 2 hours laughing about failed gardening experiments and sharing stories from our lives. As I drove home, I realized something unusual. Not once during that entire afternoon had I checked my phone to see whether Jason had called. That realization stayed with me. For years, I had arranged my life around the possibility that someone might need me. I kept weekends open. I postponed plans. I waited. Now, for the first time, I was beginning to build a schedule that belonged to me. Around the same time, Jason started reaching out more often. The calls were brief, but noticeably different. He seemed distracted, thoughtful. Once or twice he asked questions about events from the previous year. Another time he mentioned finding conflicting dates in the family calendar. I listened without pushing him toward any conclusions. Whatever he was discovering needed to happen on his own. One evening, about a month after Mother's Day, my phone rang again. This time the caller was Sophie. Her voice sounded hesitant. We talked about school for a few minutes before she finally asked if she could come visit. The following Saturday, she arrived carrying a backpack and a notebook. We spent the morning baking blueberry muffins, something we had not done together in years. As the muffins cooled on the kitchen counter, she sat across from me and opened the notebook. Inside were handwritten dates, screenshots, and calendar entries. My heart tightened as I looked at the pages. Sophie explained that she had been helping her father compare family schedules after the confusion surrounding Mother's Day. The deeper they looked, the stranger things became. Invitations had been changed. Dates had been moved. Messages had disappeared. Several events I supposedly declined had never actually been communicated to me at all. Sophie looked genuinely upset. "Grandma, I do not think this was an accident," she said quietly. I stared at the notebook for a long moment. Part of me felt validated. Another part felt exhausted. The truth was, I no longer needed proof that something had been wrong. I had already started rebuilding my life. Still, seeing the pattern laid out so clearly brought a strange sense of closure. Later that afternoon, after Sophie left, I sat on the back porch watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and blooming roses. Months earlier, discovering those missing invitations would have devastated me. Now the feeling was different. The information mattered, but it no longer controlled me. For the first time in a very long while, I understood that my future did not depend on fixing the past. The phone call on Mother's Day had opened my eyes to what was happening around me. But the weeks that followed had revealed something even more important. I had spent so much time trying to hold my family together that I had forgotten how to hold myself together. And slowly, day by day, I was learning how to do exactly that. The weeks that followed felt different from any period of my life I could remember. For the first time in decades, I was no longer organizing my days around other people's expectations. Instead of waiting for invitations, I made plans of my own. Instead of checking my phone every few minutes, I left it in another room for hours at a time. The change seemed small from the outside, but inside it felt enormous. One Saturday morning, Diane from the gardening club invited me to join a group trip to a botanical garden about an hour away. A year earlier, I probably would have declined. I would have worried that Jason might call or that Sophie might need something. This time, I accepted immediately. The trip turned out to be one of the most enjoyable days I had experienced in years. We walked through acres of colorful flowers, shared lunch beneath a shaded pavilion, and spent the afternoon talking about everything, from travel dreams to favorite childhood memories. Nobody asked me to solve a problem. Nobody expected me to carry the emotional weight of an entire family. They simply enjoyed my company. On the drive home, I found myself laughing at a story Richard had told earlier in the day. The sound surprised me. It had been a long time since laughter came so easily. Meanwhile, Jason continued investigating the strange calendar entries. He called occasionally with updates, though his tone had changed. The frustration in his voice was gradually being replaced by disappointment. Not directed at me, directed at the realization that many family misunderstandings were not random accidents. One evening, he admitted that several messages had been edited or rescheduled without his knowledge. I listened quietly. Then I changed the subject. To my surprise, Jason seemed confused. Months earlier, I would have chased every detail. Now I simply did not need to. The answers mattered, but they no longer defined my happiness. Around the same time, Sophie started visiting more often. She seemed fascinated by the life I was building outside the family circle she had always known. One afternoon, she accompanied me to a gardening workshop and spent the entire drive asking questions about my painting class, my new friends, and places I still hoped to visit. At one point she smiled and said, "Grandma, I never realized how many interesting things you do." Her comment stayed with me long after she left. The truth was, I had not realized it either. For years, I introduced myself through my relationships to other people. Someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's grandmother. Those roles were important, but they were not the whole story. Slowly, I was discovering the parts of myself that existed beyond them. One evening, as I sat on my back porch watching the sunset paint the sky shades of orange and pink, I thought about the woman I had been on Mother's Day. She sat alone at a table waiting for people who never arrived. She believed her value depended on being remembered. The woman sitting on that porch felt different, stronger, not because the past had changed, because she had finally stopped, measuring her worth through the attention of others. And somewhere between a missed holiday, an unexpected phone call, and a series of quiet choices, I had begun creating a life that felt entirely my own. By the end of summer, the changes in my life were becoming impossible for other people to ignore. My calendar was fuller than it had been in years. Between painting classes, gardening club meetings, community events, and occasional day trips with friends, I found myself looking forward to each new week instead of simply moving through it. One Thursday afternoon, while packing supplies for a watercolor workshop, I noticed 3 missed calls from Jason. Months earlier, I would have returned the calls immediately. This time, I finished what I was doing first. Later that evening, I called him back. His voice sounded concerned. He asked where I had been. I told him about the workshop and the exhibit our class was preparing. There was a pause on the line. Then he laughed softly. "Mom, I had no idea you were doing all of this." His reaction reminded me how little anyone had asked about my life recently. Not out of cruelty. Simply because everyone had become accustomed to seeing me in the same role. Reliable. Available. Waiting. Now that role was changing. A few days later, Sophie stopped by unexpectedly. She carried a small box of old photographs she had found while helping her father clean out storage shelves in the garage. Together, we sat at the dining room table sorting through pictures that had not seen daylight in years. Many of them showed family gatherings from long before social media and digital albums. Sophie studied each photograph carefully. "You are in almost every one of these," she said. I smiled. "That is because I was usually the one organizing them." The comment seemed to surprise her. As the afternoon continued, she asked question after question. Who planned this trip? Who hosted this holiday dinner? Who started this tradition? The answers were often the same. Not because I wanted recognition, because that was simply what happened. By the time she left, I could tell something had shifted in the way she viewed our family history. The following week, Jason asked if we could have lunch together. We met at a small restaurant near the river. During the meal, he admitted that he had been reviewing messages, calendars, and family plans from the previous few years. The deeper he looked, the more inconsistencies he found. Several events I supposedly declined had never actually been communicated to me. Invitations had been changed. Details had been adjusted. Assumptions had quietly replaced conversations. Jason seemed frustrated. I understood why. Yet surprisingly, I felt calm. The answers he was uncovering mattered less to me than they once would have. What mattered was what I had learned since Mother's Day. I no longer needed every misunderstanding corrected in order to move forward. As we finished lunch, Jason looked at me carefully. "You seem different," he said. I smiled. "I am." The answer was simple because it was true. The woman who spent years waiting beside the phone was gone. The woman who measured her value through other people's attention was disappearing too. In her place stood someone who finally understood that a meaningful life could not be built around waiting to be included. Driving home that afternoon, I realized the unexpected phone call on Mother's Day had done far more than expose a problem. It had forced me to see possibilities I had ignored for years. And while Jason was still trying to understand what had happened in the past, I found myself increasingly excited about what might happen next. As autumn approached, the distance between who I used to be and who I was becoming grew impossible to ignore. My life no longer revolved around waiting for invitations or wondering whether someone remembered to include me. Instead, my days filled naturally with painting classes, gardening projects, community events, and friendships that asked nothing from me except my company. One afternoon, Sophie stopped by unexpectedly carrying a laptop and a cardboard box filled with old documents. She looked unusually serious. We sat at the kitchen table while sunlight streamed through the windows. For a few moments, she seemed unsure how to begin. Then she opened the laptop and turned the screen toward me. "Dad and I found something," she said quietly. Over the previous several weeks, Sophie had been helping Jason organize old files, emails, and digital calendars stored on a family account. At first, they were simply trying to understand how so many scheduling mistakes had happened. The deeper they looked, however, the stranger things became. Sophie opened a folder and showed me a series of old email chains. Most appeared ordinary. Family gatherings, holiday plans, birthday celebrations. Then she pointed to specific messages. In several cases, invitations were discussed before I ever received them. In others, someone responded on my behalf without asking me. One message stated that I was unavailable for an event I had never even heard about. Another suggested I preferred staying home rather than attending a family outing. My stomach tightened as I read. Not because the information shocked me anymore, because seeing it written down removed any remaining doubt. For years, explanations had appeared one at a time. Missed invitations, changed dates, confused schedules. Looking at everything together revealed a pattern that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Sophie continued scrolling. There were calendar updates, rescheduled events, notes attached to invitations. Nothing dramatic, nothing scandalous, just dozens of small decisions that slowly pushed me farther from the center of family life. The most painful part was realizing how easy it had been for everyone to accept those changes without asking questions. I sat quietly while Sophie explained what she and Jason had discovered. Finally, she closed the laptop. The kitchen fell silent. Outside, leaves drifted across the backyard. "Grandma," she said softly, "I do not think any of this happened by accident." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I surprised myself by smiling. Not because the situation was funny, because I realized how little power the discovery held over me now. 6 months earlier, these emails would have broken my heart. Today, they simply confirmed something I had already learned. My worth never disappeared. Other people simply stopped paying attention to it. Later that evening, Jason called. His voice sounded different than it had before. Not confused, not defensive, just tired. He admitted that reviewing those records had forced him to confront things he should have noticed years ago. He talked about assumptions, distractions, and how easy it had become to let someone else manage every detail of family life. Then he fell silent. Finally, he said something I will never forget. "Mom, I think I owe you more than an apology." I looked out the window toward the garden where new flowers were beginning to bloom despite the changing season. For the first time, I felt no anger, no desire to prove anything, only clarity. Whatever happened next, I already had something more valuable than explanations. I had my life back. And for the first time, Jason was beginning to understand exactly what had been taken away. The next Mother's Day arrived quietly. No grand plans. No carefully arranged table waiting for guests. No expectations balanced on the hope that someone else would remember. Instead, I woke early, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and watched the morning sunlight spread across my kitchen. The day felt peaceful, not because everything had been fixed, because I no longer needed everything to be fixed in order to feel whole. Around 10 o'clock, there was a knock at the front door. When I opened it, I found Jason and Sophie standing on the porch. Sophie held a bouquet of wildflowers. Jason carried a large rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. Neither of them said much at first. They simply smiled and stepped inside. We spent the next hour talking over coffee. The conversation felt easy in a way it had not for years. No excuses. No awkward explanations. Just honesty. Eventually, Jason slid the package across the table toward me. "This is for you," he said. I carefully removed the wrapping paper. Inside was a large photo album. The cover was simple. Dark blue fabric with silver lettering. Across the front were 4 words, "The story we forgot." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The first page contained a photograph of Daniel and me standing in front of our first home. Beneath it was a short note written by Sophie. "Every family story starts somewhere." I turned the page. More photographs appeared. Not random snapshots. Moments. Real moments. Jason's first day of school. Family holidays. Birthday celebrations. Camping trips. School concerts. Neighborhood cookouts. Decades of memories carefully arranged in chronological order. But this time something was different. The story was complete. There I was helping Jason learn to ride a bicycle. There I was decorating Christmas cookies with Sophie. There I was standing beside Daniel during countless milestones and ordinary afternoons that made up a life. Every page seemed to restore something that had slowly disappeared over the years. I reached the middle of the album and found a section dedicated entirely to traditions. Sophie had researched where each one began. The annual lake trip. The Thanksgiving recipe everyone still used. The Christmas breakfast casserole. The 4th of July picnic. So many family customs traced back to moments I had almost forgotten myself. I looked up and found Jason watching me. His eyes were filled with a sadness I understood immediately. "I spent months trying to figure out what happened," he said quietly. Then I realized I was asking the wrong question. The room fell silent. The real question was how I stopped paying attention. For a long moment, nobody spoke. There was nothing left to argue about. No mystery remained. The truth sat openly between us. Not as an accusation, as an understanding. Jason continued. He admitted that somewhere along the way he assumed I would always be there. Always available. Always patient. Always waiting. He never noticed how easy it had become to let other people shape the narrative of our family. Sophie reached across the table and gently touched my hand. "We wanted you to have the whole story back," she said. I smiled through tears. The remarkable thing was that by then, I no longer needed the album to prove my worth. I had already rebuilt my life. The gardening club, the art classes, new friendships, new experiences. The woman sitting at that table was no longer waiting for permission to matter. Yet holding that album felt like closing a circle that began one lonely Mother's Day a year earlier. That unexpected phone call did not change my life because it exposed a painful truth. It changed my life because it forced me to remember something I should never have forgotten. My place in the story was never something another person could take away. I helped write it. And for the first time in a very long while, everyone finally remembered that too.